Me and Alfie are going to make a bag for life. I'm making quite a small bag. You can choose as much fabric, whatever fabric, and as big or as small as you want to make it. But I'll just measure mine, just in case you want to copy the same size. And I'll do it in inches. So my main fabric, my cover fabric, measures about 14.5 inches by 9 inches, and I'll need 2 squares of the outer fabric and 2 squares of contrasting lining fabric. Now this fabric is 100% cotton and it's quite a heavy weight, it's curtain fabric, and that means my bag's going to have a nice structure. It'll keep its shape. I'm also going to put a pocket onto the front of the bag, so I need to do that first before the bag's put together. And the rectangle of fabric I'm using here matches the lining fabric, and that measures 5 inches by 8 inches. But when that's hemmed, that'll make quite a nice small pocket just on the centre, so big enough to put something like a mobile phone in. I've got 2 straps and I've already creased these, but that's basically 2 rectangle pieces of fabric, the same as the lining, and they measure 19.5 inches by 3 inches. And the way that I've folded them and pressed them is to fold both of the sides in, a bit like bias binding, and then fold the 2 pieces over together, and then I'll simply sew across the top of that seam. It's easier than making a tube and trying to turn it inside out. So I'll do that first with the handles. So just using a straight stitch, and I'm using a white thread so it contrasts nicely, so I need to make sure that I get my lines straight. So I'll just put a back tack to keep it in place and just stitch on the edge. Now you could use an embroidery stitch, you could do a twin row of stitching, maybe you've got a twin needle in your sewing machine, and that gives it a really professional look. But I'm just going to put one line of stitches just across the edge, just to hold those 2 pieces together. Trying to keep that as straight as I can. And just back tack at the end. And the same with the other strap. So I've already pre-folded and ironed it, because it makes it easier to sew when it's already creased, basically. So again, quite close to the edge, a couple of back tacks, and sew. Just making sure my sides are lined up straight. A zigzag stitch would look nice on here. Or if you have a rip-rack stitch, a wavy stitch would be equally as good, just to make things a little bit different. And you could, if you wanted to, put some stiffening inside the strap, but I think by having 4 layers of this curtain fabric, it's going to be quite sturdy enough. That's my straps finished. The next thing to do is to take the pocket, and again I've already creased this, I just creased it by hand, and I'm just folding over the top section. I'm going to do a double fold on that, and I'm going to hem it, because that's the bit at the top of the pocket that's going to be used, so I don't want it to fray. So again with a contrast fabric, stitch, sorry, I'm just using that white thread again. Just a straight line straight across the top. Now I need to put the pocket onto the bag first before I construct the bag, otherwise I won't be able to put it on properly. Snip off the excess threads and take the front section of my bag. I'm going to fold the fabric in half so I know the centre line. I'll just put a small crease there, I can iron that out afterwards, and do the same with the pocket just so I know where the middle is, and then I can line those 2 up together. And just pop a pin in the top to hold that in place. Then I'm going to fold the sides under, cut away any loose threads that are there already. Fold the ends under, and then I'll top stitch all the way around the bag. Fold the corner over nice and square and try not to see any of the other fabric underneath. That keeps it nice and neat. So, keeping it square so your hem's at the same distance all the way around. You could, if you wanted to, have folded this and pressed it beforehand, like I did with the handles. Back to the corner, fold it over, only by about 1/4 of an inch. Same distance all the way around, so the pocket's going to sit in the centre still. Into the corner, and then back up to the top. Keeping that nice and square and straight. There. So now I need to sew around the 3 sides, keeping the top section open. And do make sure that you back tack on the top of the pockets here, because that's where, if there's any strain by putting things into the pockets, that's where it's going to be. So I'm just going to go over that a couple of times, backwards and forwards, to hold it in place. And then gently stitch down to the corner, keeping that in a straight line, because if you use a contrasting thread you will see the stitches, so I'm trying to keep that as neat as I can. Turn the corner, keeping the needle in the down position so you can pivot it squarely. Down the next section, I'll just speed up a little. And I'm using the halfway down my foot as a guide. That's where I'm watching the fabric go through to try and keep my line straight. And then back down the final side. And as with the first section, I'm just going to go over that end bit backwards and forwards 2 or 3 times, because that's where the strain is going to be taken. And there's my pocket. So snip off the threads nice and close to the fabric, both sides, and remember to take your pins out before you carry on. And if there are any other kind of embellishments you wanted to put on the bag, if you wanted to add some ribbon across the top or some applique, then do that now before you put the bag together. So the second stage will be to attach the straps, and the way that I kind of get it in my head that everything's working okay is to lay out the front of the bag, and the strap's going to go from one side to the other like that, and they need to be the same distance in from the edge. Now you need to attach the straps inside out, and I'm going to use the stitching on the edge of the strap on the outside, and I'm going to measure the distance from the edge because I want it symmetrical and I want it even with the other side of the bag. So I'll just pop a pin in there, that's 4 inches from the edge. And keep the strap so that if your stitching's on the outside, it's still on the outside when it reaches the other way, and that way it'll sit nicely on the shoulder, it won't twist. So 4 inches in, there's my strap, and I'll pin that on. I'm pinning that quite low down because I'm going to pin on the lining now, and again that's faced together. And this is the line that I'm going to sew straight across the top. So I'm going to pin through all 3 layers, the straps, the lining and the outer layer, to hold those in place. And now there's no need for the pins on the inside, so I'll take those out. And then I'll need a straight stitch around about 1/4 of an inch or a little bit more in from the edge, all the way across the top. And I'm going to use quite a small stitch, because the smaller the stitch you use, the more robust your project is going to be, it'll last longer. So there's my first strap. You may need to take it a little bit slower as you go over the bulky areas. If your machine seems to be struggling, then just slow down a little bit. And if it still struggles with the weight of the fabric, and this isn't particularly heavy, you may need to replace your needle for a sharper one. There. So now I've got the front and the back of my bag sewn together, with the handles encompassing deepest in the middle. I'll snip off those threads afterwards, but when I turn the bag the right way round, that'll be the front of my bag with the pocket and then the strap. I've got quite a long strap on mine because I like a bag to go over my shoulder, but if you wanted to keep that shorter and make it a clutch bag, or even not put a handle on there, that's up to you. Now I've already sewn together the other side of the bag exactly the same way, but this doesn't have the pocket on the front. So again, I put the handles inside, sandwiched it in between the outer layer of the fabric, the lining of the fabric, and then measured that 4 inches again from the edge so that my handles should line up when they're sewn together. Now the next stage is to open up your bag completely. Make sure your handle's tucked in because I don't want to sew that to the outside of the bag. And put the 2 sides of the bag face to face. And I'm going to stitch all the way around and leave a gap open at the bottom of the lining so I can turn it. Now it's an idea to start from the seam because this is the bit that you're going to see on the outside of the bag. So I want to make sure that those 2 seams are lined up. And it doesn't really matter if you open the seams or you keep them flat. I'm going to keep mine flat. And I'm going to pin all the way around, but making sure again that when I get to the other side, those seams are lined up. You can get away with the lining not being perfect because nobody's really going to see that, but that part on the outside of the bag you will see, and that's why it needs to match, and that's why I'm pinning that area first, making sure that the seams, if they're going to go in one direction, go in the same direction on both sides of the bag. So I'll just put a couple of more pins around here so that it keeps it nice and straight as I'm sewing. I want that to be flat and perfect. And remember, if you do have a longer strap on your bag, the handle, make sure it's tucked away nice and neatly inside because you don't want to catch the strap on the outside of your bag. But if you do, you can always just unpick it and start again. So I'll put a few pins all the way around. Remember, I'm going to leave a gap at the bottom because I'll need to turn it inside out. So just a couple will do to keep that nice and flat. And because the seams here at the end and top of the bag are so important, that's where I'm going to start stitching. I'm going around about 1/4 of an inch in, it doesn't really matter as long as it's even. And a straight stitch, straight line. This is the outside, this is the bit you'll see, so be more careful with this one. And into the corner, needle down and pivot around, foot down, across the base. This time I'm using the edge of the foot as a guide for keeping the stitches straight. So it doesn't really matter the distance of the hem as long as it's the same all the way around. And again into the corner, needle down, pull 1 more stitch, and pivot. Then up to the other side. And I'm going to take it a little bit slower as I go over the seam because there is a lot of fabric there. And the pin down to the bottom. Stop at the corner and pivot. Now this is the base of the lining section, so I want to leave a gap for turning. So I'm going to sew just a few inches in, maybe 4 or 5 inches in, and then back tack to strengthen it, and then leave a gap so you can get your hand inside to turn it, so maybe another 4 or 5 inches. Doesn't have to be perfect. Back tack to strengthen so it doesn't twist or split the stitches when I turn it inside out. Into the corner, and then back down the last side. And that should all match up and be perfectly square with no puckering. And if it does, simply undo it, repin it in place and start again. And that's back to where I started. Now then, before I turn the bag, I'll just move my pins out of the way, I want to make a little bit of a shape to the base of the bag. So, what you'll need to do is open the bag up, so take both sides and fold it into a triangle. when you've folded the triangle into a point, try and make sure that the seams, you'll feel them, you won't see them, but make sure that the seams are parallel, and then your triangle will be perfect. And I'm just going to put a pin across there. Then I'm going to measure from the corner here, see how far down that was, say 2 inches, and sew across the 2-inch mark. In a straight line. You could measure and mark that to make it a little bit simpler, but I'm trying to do it for speed because you might be getting bored by now. So across to the end. And up we go. Now I need to do that on all 4 corners. When you're confident you've got your line straight in the right place, snip off the excess corner. So on the opposite side, remember this is the base of the bag, pull the 2 sides of the fabric out into a point, feel the seams so that they match, and then you've got an equal triangle. It was 2 inches in because I want those to be the same, so I'm going to pop a pin at 2 inches and then do a straight line across the bottom, keeping the triangle an equilateral triangle. Again, if you want to draw a mark, that may be easier. So cut off my thread, and when you're happy with that, cut off the corner. Because until you're happy, or if you cut it off and you're not happy, there's no going back. Then I'll need to do exactly the same on the lining side, so I'll just do that really quickly, because I think you've got the idea now. This makes a nice square base to the bag. And if you wanted to reinforce that with a piece of cardboard, then you could do, but for this bag I shan't. And the final side of the lining. So pull it open. That's the base of the lining, just like with the outer. Pop a pin in. Doesn't matter about keeping your seams open. You wouldn't measure that. I'm doing it by eye. Straight across the bottom. Take it out. Snip off your threads. Snip off your back. Okay, now we're ready to turn. So I'm going to put my hand inside the gap that I left at the bottom of the bag. Pull it all through. There's my handles, there's my pocket. Here it comes. I'm going to push out those corners. That's where I've just sewn across to make a base for the bag, to give it some shape. So push out the corners from the inside. Push out the corners on the lining. Then I've got a gap at the bottom of the lining, and you could stitch that by hand to make it nice and neat, or use the same colour thread, but for speed's sake I'm going to sew over the top, and there we go, and just close the hole up. And then we're nearly finished. At this point you could get your other hop to put the iron on. When he's put the kettle on, you just need to give that a quick press over. Push the lining inside the bag when you stitch the hole up, snip all your threads. Give it a shake, push the corners out. Make sure the lining is nice and square on the inside of the bag. Then after that's pressed, I've got a nice little bag with a shaped bottom, so it's got somewhere to stand, and it's got a width so that you can actually put things inside it. And to fasten it, I could put a ribbon across the top, or if you've got some of those metallic little press studs, you could put one of those at the top, or just just really not bother. But I think that's quite sweet, and it would make a lovely Christmas or a birthday present, or a Mother's Day present for your mum.